Hello everybody and welcome to this mediator session. Today we will cover leveraging CBS to empower a changing world of collaboration. My name is Holl and I am a community manager of the Cisco community and the host of today's event. Welcome to this mediator session. Today we have a great opportunity to talk with top collaboration experts and Cisco Press authors. So thank you Steve Kyzer, Arun, Gonzalo, Kaustubh, and Gonzalo for joining to this session. We're really honored to have you on this event. So before we start, I would like to let you know how we actually drive this kind of sessions. At the beginning, we have a part of interviewing just to let you know more about the story of the authors and the story behind their publications and everything that has been happening there. And then they will give us away some insights, knowledge, not only about the book, but everything that is happening in this world of collaboration. And they will cover some trends and topics as well, and we will have the opportunity to clarify the questions as well, both verbally and on the Q&A panel as well. Remember that in this event, you also will have the opportunity to win a free signed copy of this book. This is a book that all of them have been co-authored. And what you have to do is just please stay with us, pay attention to everything that we're doing to the event, and you can get that one just for free in your hands. So let's get started to meet the authors. And well, thanks for joining us again. The truth is, like, these experts are extremely savvy. They are well known not only for being Cisco Press authors or person authors as well, principal engineers, distinguished engineers, and many others. But there are many questions that we can actually ask them just to find more about what's going on. So we would like to start from the beginning. So Steve, Kyzer, Arun, Gonzalo, and Kaustubh, how did you guys get into tech?
I'll start with that one. About 12 years ago, I started out thinking, how does the internet work? And I started just trying to unravel that mystery, and here I am 12 years later still learning new things about how the internet works. It's a ever-expanding Rube Goldberg machine.
So I got into technology. My sister was playing a Sierra command line adventure game, and I was 4 years old, and I didn't know how to read yet. And the only way I could interact and play was to learn to read so that I could type in and play that video game. And that's how I got inspired by technology.
Yeah, so for me, my motivation actually comes from my cousin. So I was at high school, I think. He was playing a book that talks about, so I was in India and he was doing his undergrad in networking. And he brought a book that was talking about routers and switches. And I have no clue about what they were. And I was just asking him what it is about. And then he just gave me the book. So that started this whole concept of, okay, what is networking? So that's how I got into this. Yeah.
For me, actually, and I know some of these guys have heard this story before, but for me, it was actually very accidental. I was actually working on a PhD in physics, and I had no idea about networking. I knew some things about programming, things like that, from some of the numerical analysis work that I'd been doing, but I really had no idea at all about networking, to the point of I didn't even know what an IP address was. But it was really kind of accidental, where a lot of the people in my department in physics, it was interesting, were coming back and they weren't very happy with some of the jobs that they were getting and stuff. And I was actually taking some courses, as I mentioned, in computer programming, database programming, things like that. So I was kind of getting a little bit of an itch on some of those things. And so I just decided to go to a job fair, and kind of all things came together there. And, I started talking to the folks from Cisco. They brought me on site. I had one of the worst interviews probably in the history of interviews. But somehow I learned sort of subnetting on the fly, and I guess that was enough at the time, which was almost 25 years ago. So I think they were a little bit more desperate back then. But so I was lucky to get on, and sort of that's the story. 25 years later, I'm still here, and as these guys just they've said, still learning. So yeah, that's kind of the way I've got into it.
Yeah, for me, it was a little bit of a slightly different story, I would say. I'm from India, and, Indian parents kind of want their children to either be doctors, engineers, or lawyers. And I wasn't very good with sitting in front of textbooks for long hours, so medicine was obviously out of the question. So, my parents kind of asked me to take up engineering, which I did. Little did I know what it involved and things like that. And when I was about to graduate engineering, I'd heard of Cisco as a company, and I think my last semester I took up the CCNA, and that's kind of when I got interested. And after I joined, it was an amazing experience and still continues to be so. So yeah, that's a little bit about how I got into this.
Interesting. Actually, many of you are kind of related with family just to get into tech. That's really interesting. And Steve, I have something similar to you. I remember one day my granddad just asked me how internet works out. I cannot see how data is passing from here to there. I cannot see it. Can you see it? No, I can't. Not visually. So that was a great story. Okay, so you got into tech, but how did you guys decide to choose actually this career path, the collaboration path? There are so many architecture, there are so many technologies going on around, and how did you guys decide just to focus more on the collaboration?
So for me, I actually picked that one by design. So I started into the college new hire program into Cisco after interning. And so there was a bit of an incubation program with training and learning all of the technologies. And then we got to basically stack rank and pick our technology. And because I'm a part-time musician, played in bands over the years, and always enjoyed audio. I wanted to do something with audio processing, and the multi-service voice technology group was what was closest to me to touch into technology, and before the time of wide adoption of video and things like that, and really inspiring to see how things have changed and how we can collaborate, and how audio and video can be a medium for changing the world. So
specifically. Oh, sorry, Arun, I was going to go. For me specifically, I started out in routing and switching, layer 1, 2, and 3, working on CCNA and some design aspects of enterprise networking. And, I really did that for a year, and then collaboration sort of opened up, and I decided if I'm going to do it, I'm going to be the best at it. So I switched over to collaboration and gave it my all, and here I am 6 years later, still working on collaboration topics. Didn't pick it by choice like Steve, but ended up here anyways.
Now for me, it was more about the project that I got during the internship program at Cisco. So I was doing my master's in NC State. One of my first projects was to actually write code for a SIP phone. And so my mentor actually taught how SIP actually works, etc. So that's how I got introduced into the whole collaboration space. But I never thought I'll be in the support space. That was a big surprise. But that's how the whole career journey started in terms of getting into the collaboration space.
I would say it was. I remember picking collaboration as a technology when I joined the company, and I was instantly hooked onto collaboration. It was just super interesting to me to uncover and learn how voice and video over the internet is made possible. And very quickly I was very drawn in by some of the standards that kind of power collaboration. And I've over the years met so many amazing people, and I've never really felt the need to kind of pivot to something else as the technology vertical. This has always held my interest and probably will always continue to do so. And I just think that there's so many amazing things happening now that I think I'll probably spend a lot of my time looking at these new areas and kind of exploring. So that's kind of how I got into collaboration, and it hopefully will stay here for some time.
Round out the group and say that I didn't actually start in collaboration. When I first came to the company, I joined on the hardware team. And then from there, they had actually sort of an incubator team called Config and Install back at the time, where you would kind of take a little of everything, sort of like the easy cases in all of the different technologies. So I was exposed to a bunch of different technologies. And then from there, I was actually sent to the access team. So some of you may be old enough to remember modems, but at the time it was supporting modems, right? And so I did access, which was kind of all the modem, ISDN technologies, et cetera, all that stuff for several years. And then a new team opened up, and it was called the multi-service voice team at the time. And I was actually asked if I wanted to be a part of that, and it seemed like it was a good opportunity because it was sort of the first crop of people to do that new technology as it was emerging. So I jumped at the chance to do that, switch technologies. And I've kind of continued to do that. Now more recently, I've been also trying to do a little bit of different things like IoT, some cloud architecture work. So I try to keep it diverse, but by and large, collaboration has been my home for 20-some years now. So obviously feel very attached to that technology.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. So here comes the question, right? We have too many authors here right now, so we're really lucky. And hopefully we have enough time just to learn more about you. But how did you guys meet? How did you decide to collaborate together?
This one, and I think we kind of answered it as we've talked today. And we've all worked on the multi-service voice team here at Cisco. At one point in time, we have that connection in common, and it's a really great group of individuals that work on that team, and through the generations that have came and the folks that are working there now, I think we're just a big family.
One of the things I'll say is that in regards to the book, to just give you a bit of perspective, the way it actually started, I think a lot of us kind of didn't originally plan on doing this, but this was sort of a labor of love for Kaustubh. He'd gotten in his head, he'd become an expert in SBCs, and it's something that he reached out to me about. It sounded very interesting. I mentor a few of the guys and thought, who I thought some of the best engineers, some of the most reliable engineers who I was absolutely sure would be able to deliver and do a great job. And that's slowly kind of how the team assembled. So I think that's how you're getting this particular group of guys doing it.
And Gonzalo has been my mentor for a long time, right? So he kind of knew me from day one of growing up as a newbie engineer and going through it. And you saw this as a good opportunity to grow and also do some external publications, and he connected with the opportunity. So thank you, Gonzalo.
Yeah, and talking about that, Gonzalo, actually, you're an active member of numerous industry organizations and a co-author of so many books, papers, patents, and many of you. So in your case, Gonzalo, what actually drives you to share that much and participate in so many projects?
Well, participating in projects is lack of sleep, so insomnia or something like that. But beyond that, what I will say though is kind of the way I grew up, and a little bit is where I've always felt most comfortable was in kind of a university or an academic setting. That was always kind of where I always felt most comfortable. So even when I did kind of shift over to a corporate environment at Cisco, which is great because they give you some flexibility to work on projects like this, I still held in high regard the notion of education and teaching others and passing on to the next generation. And for all of us, right, you've already heard mentoring being thrown around. Mentoring is implicit in all of our jobs. That's something that we do day in, day out anyway. So it does feel natural to do that. But I've always put a little bit of a premium on it because I think one of the things that, again, in academic environments that's kind of at a premium is things like publications. That's how you establish your name, your reputation, and sort of set up that kind of persona that you want to create. And so I always sort of carried that. And then nowadays there's so many other ways of doing it, whether it be contributions to open source or other, right? There's a variety of different ways to do that. But as I was coming up, this was a really big way of doing it, right? Being an inventor, like with patents or having books and external publications or research papers, white papers, what have you. So I've always kind of put a premium on those kinds of things. And, as I mentioned, I've been kind of bouncing around from technology to technology. As I finish up within an area, I try to make it a point before moving to another area to try and dump everything that I know and put it down before I move on. So at least there's a record, some breadcrumbs of, where I've been and what I've done. So it's just, I think it's a good practice to get into anyway.
Thank you, Gonzalo. And just to start completing this part of the interview, Kyzer, you actually work with Cisco Learning on the development of content and the strategy for Cisco certification. So we have some people on the call who want to, develop more on this area. So what's your recommendations for those pursuing a certification in collaboration?
Really look at the blueprint. My strategy for certification exams is always look at that blueprint, print it out, put it somewhere. Read through those topics and find more than one resource, right? Whether it be a book, whether it be videos or labs, and work through those bullet items. And then keep revisiting that blueprint. Highlight it with different colors. Take a look at that blueprint item and think to yourself, can I talk about this to somebody who knows a little bit about the topic or nothing at length. If you can't do that, you probably don't have the sufficient level of knowledge to go in there and take that exam. And I keep iterating over that process, and this is my personal process too, until I can look at those blueprint items and explain it to somebody. And that, to me, is sort of the best way to iterate over an exam blueprint like we have with Cisco. Other than that, I think my first point was just make sure you vary your study approach. There's not one single source of truth for any of this content. Take a look at books, take a look at videos, take a look at labs. Everybody learns differently. Don't assume one is going to get you to the finish line.
Good, thank you. And well, we have asked you a couple of questions about your collaboration career path and your path as an author, but we would like to know a bit more about like this book in particular. So when you were preparing this publication, what challenges you found, or which topic you found more interesting?
From personal perspective, it's most of us were working in TAC, and in TAC, everything is driven by customers, right? So it's like finding the right time to actually to write the book was one of the biggest challenges, is to find the quiet time where you're more productive, but at the same time do your day-to-day jobs. So that was one of the biggest things in terms of challenges. Go ahead, Kaustubh.
So I think one of the other challenges that we actually faced was, just working together as a team. I mean, I'm based out of India. The remainder of the team is based out of the US. So for us to kind of meet frequently to discuss the book, or even, meet publisher deadlines, was obviously a challenge because we have a day job to take care of. And at the same time, it's not always possible to spend the required number of hours fleshing out content for the book. So it was a challenge. It took a lot of personal time away from family, from other priorities. And, as Gonzalo kind of mentioned, it was a labor of love, I think, for all of us. And it was something that we really kind of worked very hard for. And I think it was almost a 2-year effort. So there were a lot of challenges along the way. But I can say, looking back, I can say that I wouldn't have wanted to work with anybody else. I mean, these guys have just been phenomenal during the course of writing the book, and I'm just very, very proud and privileged to be a part of this very impressive cast of authors.
I think it's worth also mentioning, so I think somewhat of a challenge turned into an opportunity for this book too, is early on, as we went through and we put together the table of contents and what we wanted to cover, we really held this principle that if we're going to introduce a topic and we're going to talk about something, we were going to start at as low of a level from a technical perspective and not draw assumptions that a reader knows something, to be able to really build that foundation, go all the way up from foundational knowledge of that topic up through, as far as we know, in-depth technical knowledge at the expert level or what have you, of those items. And really that manifested across the book, and maybe as part of the reason why, how many pages were in the book at the end, guys? It was, I think
that's what I was going to say. Yeah. So. That's exactly where I was going to go, Steve. I was going to say, and one of the reasons it took 2 years, it is 1,200 pages. And I think that hopefully one of the things that kind of bear out through the conversation today is that the reason for it is SBCs are really at that nexus. They're at that hub, and right, they touch a little bit of everything. So that's one of the reasons why there's so much to say on that. And, hopefully you get value out from reading it. But yeah, there's definitely a lot there.
Well, thank you very much, guys. So thank you for sharing your story, your experience, and the story behind this book, actually. And now it's time to learn more about you and your knowledge. So what I'm going to do is just actually pass the presenter's ball and all the privileges to Arun, so he will be helping us. And for all the audience, we have 5 experts here, and all of them will be sharing key things with us.
All right, and I'll be leading off the presentation. So first, just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time today to join, and we've got a little bit of a presentation here, and want to just talk through, really just give a current update on session border controllers, and with some specificity for Cisco Cube. So a lot's changed in the last few years. Things have changed in the collaboration space out in the industry and with Cube, and we just want to cover some of those items and really just provide an update. So with the next slide, so the first section we want to talk about and give an update on are some changes into Cube platforms and and then also updates of cloud integrations and where we're seeing Cube get used in an integration perspective that maybe is a little different or has transformed from since we wrote the book a few years ago. So what you can see here is we've introduced some new Cube platforms for availability to run, and you can see at the bottom lower left corner for small business or for small branches and small business locations, we've introduced the ISR 1100 to be able to run Cube on. We've also introduced Cube on some medium-sized platforms, specifically the Catalyst 8300 and the ISR 4461. And then we've introduced the ability to run Cube on our large platform, the ASR 1006X as well. So really refreshing the hardware, introducing new hardware into the environment to be able to suit the need for when you're deploying Cube to the sizing that makes sense for your business requirements in your architecture. Additionally, we've invested more into the virtualization space. So we now have the ability to run Cube in a virtualized environment on the virtual Catalyst 8000. So in addition to running the vCube, we can now run it on the CSR. We can also run it on the 8000V platform. And then we also now allow for running Cube in the AWS environment. So Cube is now certified to run in AWS. So if you've got workloads and applications and services running in AWS and you need to have a session border controller to broker integrations, we now permit the ability to do that as well. And those virtual platforms scale similar to what you've seen with vCube in the past on the CSR. All right, so we also want to take a little bit of a dive into some of the cloud calling integrations that we're seeing Cube enable across the industry. So really picked out kind of 5 things that are some newer integrations that we're seeing high desire for session border integrations with. So the first one being WebEx calling. So the ability to register phones into the WebEx calling environment out of the box, and the standard design there is that then you pick a cloud calling provider out of WebEx calling, and then your PSTN calling goes across that circuit. But in your enterprise, if you've got an existing PSTN connection or you've got and you want to leverage that PSTN connection and avoid tying another integrator into the WebEx cloud, Cube can be a facilitator in your local premise in order to steer calls out to the PSTN. Similarly, Cube also facilitates WebEx integrations. So if you're doing WebEx meetings, instead of having all of your PSTN calls go out to the PSTN to reach WebEx, Cube can be a broker and make sure that calls stay over the data plane, and then you don't tie up your PSTN minutes to be able to get calls out to WebEx meetings and stay on VoIP traffic instead. UCM Cloud was launched about a year ago. With the enterprise service option on top of UCM Cloud, we offer Cube as a hosted option inside of that, which really allows flexibility for tying cloud enterprise calling in with other external integrations, whether that be if you want to integrate UCM Cloud into one of these other architectures, WebEx calling, Cisco WebEx meetings, Office 365, et cetera. So it really gives you flexibility that with the presence in the WebEx backbone, being able to integrate and tie into the different services that Cisco is continuing to evolve. And then the last integration that we wanted to cover today was we also now have Cube support for Microsoft Teams direct routing. So if you've got users that are using Microsoft Teams client and they're registered into Office 365 and they're placing phone calls, instead of that having to go out to the PSTN in order to integrate into your solution, they can ride across an internet circuit, come into Cube, and then be able to reach either your enterprise communications manager phones, or also use that to leverage and go out your local PSTN connection if you want to centralize your SIP traffic and not have that disparate across different services. So those are some of the new integrations and platforms that we've got for Cube, and I'll pass it over to Gonzalo now, and he'll talk about a little bit of a feature update for Cube and what we've got to offer in the current version.
Thanks, Steve. So now that we've given you a sense of the new platforms and cloud integrations for Cube, I think we should spend a bit of time talking about some of the most anticipated features coming out for Cube. Now, this is going to give you some context as far as the current state of the art for Cube, but really it's going to dovetail nicely into some of the serviceability and security deep dives that we'd like to spend some time on. Cisco iOS XC, as you can see there in version 17.3.1a, Opus audio codec support on Cube was introduced. And what's great about this is the fact that Opus is a very powerful new codec, and the nice thing about it is it's open, it's royalty-free, it's industry standardized, all those good things. But really, it's very powerful, and it's got great performance across a wide range of interactive audio applications, and it also sort of dynamically scales for all kinds of applications. So anything from low bit rate, narrowband speech at 6 kbps, all the way to sort of really very high quality stereo music performances at full rate 510 kbps. So it really runs the range. So that's exciting that that'll be coming. So let's talk about the next one. So there, for dial peer live binding, the bind command, and you've probably seen it, but that bind command feature has been around forever. So it allows you to configure the source IP address of signaling packets and media packets. And this capability has been around for at least as long as I can remember. But the thing that's different now is, as of 17.3.1a, we now have the ability to either change or add binding on a dial peer that doesn't have active calls. So while other dial peers with that same binding have active calls. So the beauty of that is now, before, when we needed to make a configuration change with live traffic, we weren't able to. We'd have to shut down the SIP system, things like that. And now, or it would generate an error. So this actually makes this much more powerful and makes us much more dynamic that way. So moving on to the next one there for HuntStop. Now, the ability to configure server groups in order to specify a list of destination SIP servers for a single dial peer has been available since 15.4.1t in iOS, in the original iOS. But now in 17.4.1a, we also now have the added capability to be able to configure HuntStop, but based on configurable response codes. And so this can be through, and what you can do is, with this feature, you can actually choose to stop hunting through the server group if a single response code or range of response codes are received. Okay, so moving on to the next one here, and this one's near and dear to my heart as a fax guy, but fax detection is essentially just a level set, the capability to detect automatically whether an incoming call is voice or fax. Now, fax detection is typically used if you need to have, say, a single phone number for both voice and fax services. And it could be initially answered by an auto attendant or an IVR service. Now, at this point, the media stream needs to be monitored, and what it's going to monitor for is the CMG fax tones. These are those calling tones at the very beginning of a call that the fax machine generates. That's going to indicate that it's a fax call. But those calls that are identified as coming from a fax machine with this feature are then going to be redirected, and as you can see there, this can happen either via re-invite or refer, but it'll be redirected to a new destination, such as a fax server, right, in most cases. But support for, which is call and transfer, that actually came out on the XE platform in 17.2.1R for Cube, though it was available originally in classic iOS. Okay, so I want to talk and spend a few minutes here on this last one, and I'll give you two visuals here in just a minute, but it's regarding Cube Media Proxy and recording. But in order to do that, we kind of need to understand and level set on what Cube Media Proxy is. And essentially, that's a solution that provides a multiple forking function, and it's built on the Cube architecture. Now, multiple forks are required for things like recorder redundancy and sort of other advanced media processing needs, speech analysis, those kinds of things. But Cube Media Proxy supports both unified CM, network-based recording, and you'll see it in these slides here in the one I'm going to show you here in just a moment. It's also known as XMF-based recording. And I'll explain why that is in just a minute, why it has that name. And it also supports SIP-based media recording, or for short, SIPREC. But in any case, it supports both of those recording types to enable forking and recording of RTP streams. So let's just take a quick look at each of these. So here, I won't read through all these lines here, but here you can see that Cube Media Proxy, using unified CM network-based recording, or as sometimes mentioned, NBR, and as I mentioned, this is known as XMF-based media proxy. It essentially requires you to configure inbound dial pairs from unified CM. But in this case, unified CM is going to register as an XMF, or an extended media forking. It got this name. But essentially in this case, as you can see from the diagram here, is first a call is going to be set up between the endpoints. And then after receiving a media forking request from unified CM, the cube media proxy is going to establish multiple media forks to the configured targets. And now this could be one or more recorders, as you can see there on the right-hand side. Okay, and let's compare that now with SIPREC-based recording. Okay, so here you can see the similarities, but now this session recording protocol, right, or SIPREC as we've talked about. And so let's just level set on what that is for just a moment. It's an open SIP-based protocol for call recording of RTP streams. Now, this is an industry standard architecture and really a framework, quite honestly, for SIP media recording. And it's defined by the IETF, but the nice thing about it is it's compatible with many different, right? So you can have third-party devices on your network. That's what SIPREC really enables. So it allows you to do systems. In our case, right, obviously what we're interested in is, and this includes SBCs like Cube, right? So they also support SIPREC. Okay, so just at a very, very high level, the SIPREC standard, if you look at it, it basically defines a protocol that's used to interact between an SRC, which is just a session recording client, just think PBX or think an SBC like Cube in our case right here, and a session recording server or an SRS. And that would be like the analytics device that you see there on the right-hand side. So this is what's and through here, SIP is going to be used to establish a recording session between the Cube Media proxy and the recorders. And what you can see here in the diagram is that Cube Media proxy accepts an inbound RTP fork from a Cube SBC, and then it replicates this RTP media fork to multiple SIPREC targets. In fact, it could be up to 5 of them. So that should give you an idea of kind of the thing. But this is standards-based media recording, and we're seeing this more and more often. Okay, so in addition to the new Cube features that we've just talked about, right, and those are features that have come out since we've written the book, now what we've got is, a bunch of serviceability enhancements that are incredibly powerful in Cube. These are things that you can see here, and I'll just list them. I won't talk through them, but things like void trace or RTP port clear, support for a collaboration solution analyzer. Now, Arun's going to spend some time here, to spend a few minutes deep diving a bit into these, just to illustrate their usefulness and how powerful they are when you're troubleshooting issues on Cube. So with that, I'll hand it off to you, Arun.
Thank you, Gonzalo. One of the biggest Christmas gifts that we got last year was a feature called void trace. I'm sure you've opened up a few attack cases in the past. The first thing that we always ask is help explain what the problem that you're running into. And typically when you're having a call disconnect issue, the first thing we as attack engineers would ask you is, hey, can you get the output of debug CCSIP message? And sometimes it's easy to collect. Maybe the problem happens frequently, it's great. But oftentimes it doesn't happen readily, right? Like you have hundreds of users making inbound calls and outbound calls, and asking you to wait for the next problem occurrence is always a frustration thing for both customers and partners. And it's something we try to avoid, but without it, we couldn't do anything. So it was always a pain point for our customers to, I have to enable this debug, and I have to wait, and I have to collect this, and I have to give it to TAC. All those days are gone. Now we have a really cool functionality called void trace. So what void trace allows us to do is it all has an always-on logging. So similar to CUCM, which always has traces enabled every single time, void trace is now giving that similar capability to Cube. The good news about this is there's absolutely zero performance impact, because all of this is actually done in the memory, in real-time memory. So in terms of enabling it, it's super simple because it's already enabled for you. So you don't have to do anything out of the box to actually do it. Once you run the specific iOS versions that is actually supported, the system already configures it. And by default, you will have 10% of your memory reserved for this type of feature. Now, if you want to increase the memory limit, you can always do, but you can go from all the way from 1 MB all the way to like 1 gig of memory that you can provide for this feature. But even if you put let's say 500 MB, the router doesn't use all of that in one single time. It gradually increases based on the consumption or based on the number of calls that you have within the system. So in terms of commands to actually clear the void trace buffers. All you have to do is just do no trace and trace. And in the future releases, we'll be having a particular CLI command that you can actually use it to clear the buffers as well. So there's several set of show commands that's available where you can actually take a look at the void trace for a particular call or a particular call ID or session ID. But one thing that we always recommend is, because of the fact that we need to correlate multiple calls together sometimes to understand the root cause of a call disconnect, we recommend you to collect these 3 show commands together. One is the show version, show run, and show void trace all in one single bundle, and you can just take it over from your SSH terminal. Or if you are doing some sort of like an automation in place, you can also configure an embedded event manager. An example is provided here. And all this EM applet is basically doing is it's opening up a file and it's running these commands and storing all that in a file, so that at any point in time, if you just need one command to run, you can just run event manager, run void trace, and then you can copy the file to any place that you want. So the main key advantage is you no longer have to wait for the problem to happen and then provide debugs, because all that debugs is already running, and this should solve for 80 to 90% of the times. The amount of information that we have in void trace should be enough to troubleshoot and find the root cause. And if we need more, then we can go through the normal process. Now, here's a really, really cool thing where, how do you analyze void trace? Like a collaboration solution analyzer, I'm sure some of you have seen this and used this in the past. This is a go-to tool for a lot of our customers and partners where they analyze CUCMs, the expressway logs, etc. But one gap that was always been is Cube. It couldn't parse Cube. A few weeks back, we actually added support for void trace within Collaboration Solution Analyzer, so that the bundle that you're collecting from the router, you can just drag drop into the Collaboration Solution Analyzer, and literally you don't have to use any text edit, text wranglers, or any of that sort. The system actually guides you through the whole troubleshooting process. Let's see how it works. So the first step is to upload the log, and because of the fact that the log has show version, etc., it automatically detects that the log belongs to Cube, so you don't have to select a product type. And then once you run the analysis, it extracts the iOS XE versions, the running configurations, etc. And then it also looks at the void trace and provides the entire list of calls that were handled by Cube in the context of that void trace. So you don't have to look for calling party numbers, call party numbers. You don't have to search them. Everything is listed, and you can just type it, and it'll automatically filter it. And you can just click that one particular call that's of interest. So in our case, we are interested on the call that was made by the 2018 number. And then once you click that, it also gives you a good perspective of, did the call even establish in the first place? What was the inbound leg? What was the outbound leg? There's going to be a couple of releases down where you will have the ability to automatically see what dial pairs were actually used for the inbound leg, what dial pairs were used for the outbound leg. So imagine you have a Cube that has tens of dial pairs. Instead of manually going through the logs and finding out what the configuration, etc. is, the Collaboration Solution Analyzer will show the dial pair but also highlight the configuration. So that's coming up in the next release. Now, one of the nice parts about this is, in addition to getting the call log, you also have the ability to, kind of look at the entire ladder diagram as well. A lot of these tools, you have to go to Wireshark, etc. But now using void trace, you can get to know where the call is coming from, where the call is being routed. Is it going to CDP? Is it going to Q? Is it going to another Cube? Is it going to CUCM? And then you can also quickly, visually identify who's originating the call disconnect and this is very, very useful while troubleshooting a complex call flow like in a contact center environment. And another thing is, a lot of the times we troubleshoot media negotiation issues, right? So maybe there's a codec mismatch, etc. What the tool allows you to do is you can just mouse over each of these messages, and it gives you like a quick extract of what is the key information within that message. So for example, on a 200OK, it will show you what codec was actually selected by Cube in order to establish that. Also, if you have any media mismatches, you can just visually look at it and troubleshoot what the problem is. At any point in time, if you want to actually see the message, all you have to do is click this link, and then it will contextually open that message right within the CSA itself. So this kind of gives you like a really nice tool as both as an administrator and also as a person learning for certifications, etc., where you can use this combination of white trace and collaboration solution analyzer to quickly troubleshoot and solve your customer issues. The one other thing I wanted to also highlight from a serviceability perspective, the concept of being able to clear hung RTP connections. So there are several scenarios where you could run into hung RTP, but most of them are very, very rare scenarios. But when a few scenarios are, so let's say you have a standby and an active router in a very specific scenarios, it is possible that the RTP connections that are established are not correctly torn down. In some of them are related to software bugs, some of them are related to how the call signaling happens from one cube with another third-party device, etc. So in those scenarios, what used to happen is these hung RTP connections will keep on building, and over the course of 3 months or 6 months, you would end up in a scenario where there's no port available, and then someone would have to reload. And this was related to a couple of instances that we saw with customers, and then we worked with engineering to eliminate that scenario where now the queue by itself will show you what are all the ports that are being utilized, but it is not associated with a particular call. We call this as RTP port leaks. So if you use show RTP stats, it will show you at a per media pool basis. A media pool is basically the range of IP addresses and ports assigned to that pool. So in this case, we could easily see the media pool number 2 as 3 RTP ports that are being leaked. And this is a very, very rare scenario, but if it were to happen, you don't have to worry now. You can just use the command clear wipe RTP port, the media pool number, and then the specific RTP ports to clear, and that will clear that particular port and make it available for other future calls. So those are some of the key serviceability enhancements that were recently introduced, and we continuously work with engineering to bring new things, and there's going to be a few very useful features from a collaboration solution analyzer feature in the next couple of months. With that, Kyzer is going to show us some of the important enhancements that have gone from a security perspective within the product.
Thank you. Thanks, Arun. So as far as security goes, we covered a lot of the topics in the chapter, and we really went into a deep dive in security on Cube. But since then, since the books came out, there's been a couple new things. As part of the security readiness criteria put out in 1611, there were some massive changes to the way we handle encryption of passwords. Cube has various usernames and passwords for things like your registration to a service provider, which are nice to keep very secure, as well as changes to SRTP debug outputs. We don't print the keys. You'll see what that looks like, but we don't print the keys in debugs anymore. And then finally, we added a feature called SAN, or Common Name Validation, or CN or SAN validation for incoming certs. And then lately in 17.3, we've had TLS server name indication for outbound client hellos in a TLS handshake. And I'll show you what these look like in a couple upcoming slides. I apologize, you're going to have to look at some configuration text, but I just want to outline what's new. So as far as the encryption changes in 1611, this first set of commands here, the key config password encrypt, this isn't exactly a new command in this version, but it is new for Cube. Cube having a requirement that our passwords need to be authenticated. If you look at that second note there, authentication username Cisco, my password 123. If you try to put that into a CLI on a 1611 plus iOS device, you will get an error that it failed to encrypt the password because Cube now has that prerequisite. So you need to select a key and a master password and then enter the password encrypt yes, which will add a level of encryption to your running config for those passwords. And when you look at that in the output, you'll see an encrypted password there. It's pretty straightforward, but it'll catch you off guard if you don't know that you need to actually run those 2 prerequisite steps to configuring some usernames on Cube and even CME. This is a simple change in 1611, but before 1611, if you ran a debug CCSIP message or some other debug for something even like XMF call recording, you would see the SRTP crypto suite as well as the key printed in plain text. Some malicious person who might get access to your syslog messages in transit could have that key and decrypt your SRTP audio, and that's not good. So what we do now in debugs is we just print out X's across all of the debug outputs, so you're not going to see any SRTP keys. But if you run a show SIP UA calls during an active phone call, you can find that key. So if you're working with TAC and you're trying to troubleshoot something and you need to decrypt that audio and TAC wants the key, you just have to run that show command to verify during an active call what key is associated with a given SRTP stream. And this brings Cube into line with other products like IP phones, Call Manager, and Expressway, which also mask the keys in their debug outputs. TLS SAN and CN validation. What this is a new postfix command for the crypto signaling SIP UA portion, where we select a default trust point that we're going to send for outbound messages. But we also say, do I want to validate this common name or the subject alternate name for inbound certificates? And if we add this postfix to the crypto signaling command, any inbound certificate Cube receives will be checked against the DNS session target or server group or outbound proxy address that exists on the dial peer we used. So it's just an extra level of verification and authentication for those inbound certificates to make sure that they actually do or are coming from the person we suspect them to come from. And keynote here, if there is a CN and a SAN present, the SAN takes precedence over the CN. And then last but not least is server name indication. This is actually an RFC 6066 TLS extension. And what it does when configured is adds a value to the client hello that we send. And it's extension value. And it's effectively a way to signal who we are trying to communicate with in this TLS session so that the server who receives it can do some verification checks on their side. It's pretty simple to configure, but the main point here that happened in 17.3 was the change to voice class TLS profiles. With all of these postfix additives we have on that crypto signaling command for SIP UA, it started getting a little bit muddy. So 17.3 adds a new voice class TLS profile where, as you can see in the slide here, we do a question mark. We can see the CN SAN validate. We can see the cipher, the client VTP, and the SNI value. And you'll only see it in this voice class TLS profile. And there's a little simple syntax at the bottom showing you can still have the same cipher options. You can set the client verification trust point. You can do the CN SAN validate server, as well as the Cube trust point to send and outbound connections, as well as the server name indicator sent and outbound connections. And to tie that back into the crypto signaling command, you simply define the TLS profile that you configured a step earlier. Now, the key here is that server name that is sent in the outbound SNI header will be derived from the session target. It must be a DNS record. It is probably going to be an A record if you have an SRV query, but ultimately it's going to be a fully qualified domain sent in the outbound message when we send a client hello. So again, just some new features that add a little bit of extra authentication and functionality to Cube's already robust security platform. With this, I will turn it over to Kaustubh, who's going to talk to us about a couple new pieces of IETF work.
Thanks, Kyzer. So I'm just going to run through a couple of industry-wide efforts, namely STIR and ASAP, which we will talk about in a couple of slides. So these are forward-looking initiatives that would likely have certain ramifications as far as all enterprise SBCs are concerned, of course, including Cube. So Arun, can you just go to the next slide, please? Right. So STIR essentially is an industry-wide effort that's being carried out to combat robocalls and to combat impersonation attacks, which are of pretty significant numbers as far as the United States is concerned. So much so that we've had the FCC step in and actually require all service providers across the United States to actually support and implement the STIR framework by July of this year. And the way STIR as a framework combats impersonation attacks and robocalls is by cryptographically asserting and subsequently cryptographically verifying caller identity. Arun, next slide, please. Sorry about the background noise too. I think we can skip the slide, that's fine. So I'm not going to get into the details of how the STIR architecture actually works. I think there's a very good description of the working of the STIR architecture that's been provided in the book. But at a high level, we have what's known as an authentication service, which basically creates a JSON web token, which is also known as a passport in the context of the STIR framework. And embedded within that passport or within that JSON web token are a bunch of claims. So essentially the calling number, the called number, the time at which the call was created. And once that JSON web token or passport is created, we have a digital signature that's created over that passport, and the call is then sent towards the destination. Somewhere in the destination network, we have what is known as a verification service, and that particular verification service essentially checks whether the digital signature pans out. If so, the call is sent to the destination device. If not, the call can either be failed or some sort of a notification can be sent to the administrator. So essentially, it's cryptographically asserting a caller ID and cryptographically verifying it. And of course, for this particular framework to work, there has to be some vector of trust between the authentication service and the verification service. So this is what an unencrypted passport looks like. So you have the calling number, you have the called number, and the time at which the call was placed, and that's encapsulated in the IAT claim. You have a whole bunch of other claims which are specific to or are leveraged, I would say, by service provider networks as opposed to enterprise networks. And a very detailed description of each and every one of these fields is being provided in the book as well. Essentially, so the passport or STIR is not just a framework for, carrying caller ID, right? It can be leveraged, it can be enhanced to carry richer information sets. So it can be leveraged to carry logos. It can be leveraged to carry photos even. It can even be leveraged to carry textual descriptions. So one of the ways in which STIR and passport can be leveraged is to transmit what is known as rich call data between, two phones. So a classic example of that is what is as displayed on the screen. So as you can see, if somebody from TAC were to call out to a customer about a service request, the customer's phone or cell phone can actually end up, providing a display as shown in the screen. So you can have the logo of Cisco from where the call originates. You can have, information displayed, that identifies a specific department within Cisco, which in this case is TAC. And then, of course, you can have the service request number. So what this essentially does is it provides the customer, first of all, confidence that this call is indeed from Cisco, and also provides kind of context of what this call is about. Of course, this is not just, specific to Cisco. This can be leveraged for any enterprise and can be used to essentially, propagate or communicate information that is useful from a contextual perspective. And in the case of rich call data specifically, it would be required for enterprise networks to have the ability to create passports and even consume these passports such that these passports can contain claims, with all of this rich call information. And for enterprises to be able to mint a passport or to be able to consume a passport, it would likely be required to have this logic running on SBCs or at the very least on third-party applications that peer directly with SBCs. So in the next couple of months, probably maybe even a year out, we'll actually start to see these capabilities trickling into SBCs and start seeing these integrations where SBCs peer with third-party.
Yeah, and just so you know, he really was towards the end here. I think the only thing that he wanted to share was this last one right here, the automatic SIP trunking and peering. And essentially what that is it's a new framework. It's a new working group that we're creating. And in fact, it's a working group that Kaustubh is the reason that it actually got created. But it's a way to have administrators to be able to essentially simplify and automate the process of trunk and peering. Right now, there's a large manual element to that. But right now, what we're going to do is they're actually working on a profile to be able to actually automate that process. Just of what you want to say, more of an awareness thing to make you aware that this is that as a result of the work that was done on the book, that actually yielded this work right here, and it actually starts on the path here. And this is really in its very, very beginning. It's just in its infant stages. But the idea is that once we actually have this, we'd like to try and work with some customers, work with some service providers, where we can actually kind of do a proof of concept of showing how this new ASAP framework works, and it automates the entire process of configuring SIP trunks. So I think that was the end of his presentation, right? And here it's just a diagram actually showing how that works. So I think that's the end of.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo, and thank you everyone from the audience. We know we're just on time, so just please let us make one quick question to the audience. Most of the rest have been covered either in the chat panel or in the Q&A panel. So there's one question here. How was the author order determined on the book cover? Is there like a way? Is there a formula?
Well, there's many different ways, and I believe that was actually one that was my call. I think we all kind of agreed that Kaustubh was the one who really originally brought the project to us, so we thought he should be the first named author. And then after that, we really did it just based on a variety of different factors. And again, it varies from book to book. But like, for example, Arun wanted his name listed lower because he didn't like his name as long as it was being higher up on the list. I thought Steve did a ton of work on the sections that he worked on, so I thought he should be above my name. So it really worked. And actually, Kyzer was learned because he was a late addition to the team. So it really just kind of cobbled itself together. But I mean, a lot of times it's, either alphabetical order if everyone kind of did the same amount. But generally, at least on the projects that I've been on, the originator of the projects is generally listed as kind of the first author.
Well, thank you very much. We are kind of like sharing the time, but I will cover just one more question, and the rest we will be adding on an FAQ document that we will be out on this event page. So I say, can you inform us about the transcoding in this session border controllers?
Transcoding support is there for if you have a DSP or a PVDM on the actual cube itself, and then you configure it just like a normal DSP farm with all of its capabilities, but you can assign it to register with cube. We call that cube LTI, or local transcoding interface. Think of it as a transcoder that cube can use. So one side of the call can be G729, the other side of the call can be G711, and you can use transcoding right there on the cube. Kind of the capabilities that Cube has for transcoding. It just builds on top of what was already offered by the existing DSP farm infrastructure.
Yeah, so really where that comes into play, and that's leveraged, is in the integrations when you've got disparate codecs. A certain service provider or server that you're talking to only supports one codec, and then on the other side, you only support a completely different codec, and then you need something to be able to broker between those, and then the hardware DSPs allow for conversion of that audio from one audio payload to the other.
Thank you very much. And the last question is, because this has been for quite a while, is what type of debugs will be captured by VoIP trace?
What it'll do is it'll get all the SIP messages. It also captures some of the finite state machines. Then it also has a very nice concept of summarizing like what that call was about. So before before a call is being documented within the log, there'll be like a cover buffer that talks about what dial peers were actually matched, and then when the call ends, there's another cover buffer that talks about like what was the call disconnect, etc. So it's a combination of SIP messages, finite state machines, and key information about that particular call.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So because of the timing, and thank you so much for bearing with us just a couple of minutes more, this closes down the Q&A session for now. The rest of the questions, I will be adding them on an FAQ document just on the event page, just where you register. And so as the video, you will be able to find it out just in the event page where you register for this. Just as promised, I'm going to mention some extra resources. These are connected to everything that they have presented today. And I'm going to mention as well the winners of the book. All right, so in the chat you will find all the information about the extra resources and related resources. And now I'm gonna mention the winners. Please forgive me if I don't pronounce your name properly. I will try my best to do it. So these two signed books that we have, one goes to Arun. He's actually been very active on the chat. That goes to the Americas. And the second book goes to Grigory Romanchuk. So Grigory is just actually in Europe. So we had got one in Americas and the other one in Europe. So what's going to happen is just like people from the Cisco community will contact you. We will use the email that you used to register for this event. So please stay connected and stay tuned for that. Please help us out to fill out a survey. it let us know how we're doing on these events and what would you like to see in upcoming mediators events, like which authors, which books, and how we can do to improve your experience here. And for those who didn't have the chance to win a signed book, we have great news. We have a Cisco Press code discount. You can get 45% discount on any book or learning material till February 20. And that's going to be on the chat as well. Let me place that for you. You have to use the code knowledge and fill out the survey so you can get that one as well. And well, this concludes the session from today. I really would like to thank all the authors. Not often we have the chance to collaborate with great experts like you and with so many at the same time. So we feel very lucky and thankful in the community. So thank you, Steve, Kyzer, Arun, Gonzalo, and Kaustubh for being with us today. And we wish all of you have a great day. And if you need anything extra, please let us know. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks.